All right, let's talk about Rosie. Rosie is the debut studio album by singer, songwriter, dancer, idol, etc. Rosie Park, more commonly known as Rosé, who you're probably familiar with whether you've been keeping up with Blackpink at any point in the last decade, or maybe you've just heard Apata a million times now. I myself have been a fan of Blackpink since 2019, Kill This Love era. In fact, that was the song that got me into K-pop as a whole, and thus kickstarted the rabbit hole of internet K-pop standom that consumed my life for 3 years. Blackpink has always been such an interesting group to me, because they're one of the biggest girl groups in the world, and yet they have some of the most underused potential of any group. Considering they've spent the majority of their career locked away in YG's dungeon between releases, and anytime they did release music, it was pretty much a copy-paste of the same Teddy Park formula over and over again. I always felt like there was so much more they could do if given the chance, especially Rosé, who is undeniably one of the most unique vocalists in third-gen K-pop. Now, you may or may not know this, but the members of Blackpink have all released solo projects even while primarily being Blackpink members. Jennie had solo, Lisa had La Lisa, Rosé had R, Jisoo had Me. Wow, Blackpink titles truly astound us with their creativity. And while those projects largely fit into the K-pop template Blackpink was known for, Rosé's solo project actually seemed to give us a taste of what a solo career from her would look like, or could look like. The 2 songs she released, On the Ground and Gone, were fully in English and really leaned heavily into a more acoustic singer-songwriter style of pop music that isn't as typical of Blackpink's usual music, especially Gone, the kind of song you'd expect from someone like Olivia Rodrigo or Sabrina Carpenter, not necessarily a K-pop idol. So seeing her release more solo music recently and tease an entire album, I was pretty excited to see what she'd come up with. Take Lisa, for example. I feel like her recent solo music has been more emblematic of her true solo style as an artist, versus earlier songs like La Lisa and Money, which were still good. Okay, La Lisa was good, but they were kind of within the Blackpink formula still. And this kind of emergence as a soloist could not be more the case than for Rosé with Rosie, which really leans all the way into her personal style that we saw earlier and extends it across a full-length album with 12 tracks. I mean, YG truly could never. This album is very dedicated to the songwriting and the story Rosé tells of past toxic on and off relationships that she is trying to move past. She is credited as a writer on all the songs and herself made a big point of this album being a moment of vulnerability for her, a way to get closer to her fans and be honest about her real struggles with relationships, which I know might sound kind of typical and whatever to a lot of people, but for someone coming out of the K-pop industry where dating of any kind is seen as quite taboo, I feel like this is a big deal. Altogether, when it comes to the genre of this album, it's a pretty standard pop album through and through. There are a lot of different influences though. Primarily, we get some punk pop and alt pop elements reminiscent of artists like Avril Lavigne. We get a lot of very standard acoustic ballads similar to Gone. We even get some R&B. The biggest criticism of this album, I think, has been that it feels more like a mesh of different famous pop female singers rather than one cohesive style that is unique to Rosé. And while I can understand that sentiment, especially on the first listen through this album, I felt like the more I listened to it, the more I could really feel Rosé's identity and voice shining through. While I can name other artists that these songs do remind me of, and you'll notice me doing that a lot as we go through the album song by song, I think put all together it still ultimately feels unique and personal to Rosé, which at the end of the day, that was her goal with the album. Honestly, I liken Rosie a lot to The Secret of Us by Gracie Abrams. There's some really high moments, along with some songs that kind of just fill in the story without being as memorable, but overall, through the mix of styles, you still end up with a cohesive, enjoyable listening experience. One other important overall note I want to make is on the vocals. I think Rosé's vocals are just really gorgeous throughout this entire album and really unique to her. Like I said at the start, her voice has always stood out to me within the K-pop sphere, but being in a girl group, she's only getting about a quarter of the vocals on each song, right? So seeing her take lead on 12 entire tracks is really great because you can tell she can command a track on her own. She has the voice for it. She has that unique texture that's really interesting. She has a lot of emotion behind her voice, and it makes this really compelling to listen to. So to take a closer look at Rosie, we're going to briefly go through all the songs one by one, and I'll give you more of my personal thoughts on each, along with some final overall thoughts on the whole album at the end. So yeah, let's get into it. Track number 1, fittingly titled Number One Girl, is quite a strong opener to this album. It's structured like a typical power ballad that builds slowly throughout the runtime, leading to some really big emotional moments, and we really get to hear Rosé's vocals shine through. I feel like it has that kind of wide sweeping melody that is very typical in K-pop ballads. I don't know how to describe describe it. Maybe that's just me, but it was reminiscent of Hope Not, Cactus by Twice, you know, songs like that.
For you, 난 아파도 좋아. And I, isn't it lonely?
Lyrically, this song resembles the desire to be at the top of someone's list, to be the one person they care for the most, to be loved and appreciated, which is a theme that kind of really sticks throughout this entire album, and I think that makes this a really fitting opening track. Again, this is kind of a track that on first listen, you know, it can sound kind of generic, but with more listens, it really grew on me and felt very in touch with Rosé, felt very personal to her. And I think it pivots nicely from her earlier solo tracks to kick us off into this album, because it gives us a very raw emotional sense to her artistry, to her personal voice, you know? I mean, her vocals are really powerful on this one, and it's impressive to see how she's able to build intensity with her voice alongside the production. Then we get 3 AM, which is the biggest standout on this album, at least to me. This track really has such an interesting sound to it. I love the way it blends acoustic and synthy elements beautifully to make for a powerful song. I also love the vocal style Rosé employs in the chorus. She has this like whiny tone where she's singing, but it sounds like she's just talking. I mean, it's kind of a conversational chorus just about the highs and lows of this relationship, and I think it really mixes in well with the more laid back verses. I don't know, something about this song just like really feels right. It feels very well done. And it's very emblematic of the punk alt-pop vibe that is present throughout the entire album, which honestly I feel like is Rosé's best style. 2 Years is another pretty standard power ballad similar to Number One Girl, now laying out the story of a breakup and Rosé's attempts to move on, but still struggling to get over it even 2 years later. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about this one. It's quite solid, I enjoy it, and I do really like how the production builds throughout. It makes for a very powerful ending. Toxic Till the End is definitely another big standout on the album. I think this made perfect sense as a single because again, it really leans into the punk pop genre that Rosé does really well here. It's very energetic, it's really fun and easy to listen to. It just works. This song works really well. People have said it sounds kind of like a mix of Taylor Swift and Avril Lavigne. It definitely does have that Taylor Swift vibe though in the storytelling and lyricism, similar to other artists like Olivia Rodrigo and, you know, Emails era Sabrina Carpenter. Those artists were also very influenced by Taylor Swift, and I think the comparison does make sense. Like Rosé is kind of stepping into that sphere as well with her storytelling, with her songwriting. Drinks or Coffee feels like such a change of pace from the rest of the album so far. It has this groovy and even kind of sexy vibe to it, very reminiscent of like Talk Talk on Brat. Again, I think Rosé really does well with these more upbeat instrumentals. Her voice really fits in here. Yeah, I don't have much else to say, but this one is definitely a standout to me. Next is Apatsu, which I think everyone knows this song by now. This blew the fuck up, and for good reason. It's a ton of fun. This is definitely the most K-poppy song on this album. Like, I could easily imagine a group like ITZY or maybe even Twice singing the song. Honestly, it's very JYP. Bruno Mars's feature is also really well done. They bounce off each other super well, and these performances, woo, I mean, is it hot in here or what? Anyways, the other day, someone I know said this is like an embarrassing song to enjoy, and I was like, girl, I wholeheartedly disagree. Again, it could just be the K-pop stan in me. I've definitely attuned my ear to some weird stuff. But to me, it's kind of refreshing to see something like this become so mainstream in Western pop. I mean, this even had my sister going, pata, pata, and learning the dance, even though she has never liked K-pop. It's refreshing. It has a unique charm to it, but it's also still not very far off from Western pop. This is the only song on the album that I like knew before kind of sitting down to listen to the whole thing, and it's kind of funny because it feels like it's just squeezed in there. It's very different from everything else in the album, but I do like it. I like that we get this really high energy moment right in the middle of the album in between all the other chaotic sad shit going on. It reminds me a lot of Hot to Go, right in the middle of The Rise and Fall of a Midwestern Princess. Similar vibes. Game Boy is one of my personal favorites on this album, easily top 3 on my first listen, and that's still the case. This feels like something straight out of Eternal Sunshine or just like Ariana Grande in general, and y'all know how I feel about Eternal Sunshine, so this is really a standout to me. I just love the R&B vibes here. The runs throughout the melody line, the electronic drums, the gorgeous backing vocals, like this really is my type of jam, and Rosé sounds so good here. Once again, this feels kind of different from everything else, but also not too far off. It's fairly similar to like 3 AM and Drinks or Coffee. You're probably starting to get a sense of like my favorites on this album. These are pretty typical pop songs, but they have this kind of like punk electronic touch to them, which is something that scratches my brain, right? Stay a Little Longer is a return to the emotional ballad nature of earlier songs like Number One Girl and 2 Years. Though this one is entirely a piano ballad through and through, it doesn't build up and down a ton instrumentally, it just really focuses on letting Rosé's voice shine through. And the emotion in her voice is just unparalleled here. This really feels like one of the most emotional songs on the album for sure that she's ever done. The little vocal cries in the chorus, they're just so immaculate. When I first listened to Not the Same, I felt like the vocals gave sexy R&B, but the instrumental gave yeehaw country. So it was kind of an interesting mix to me, and I still really like it. Her vocals go kind of crazy on this one, and ultimately the acoustic vibe gives it this sorrow, sassy tone that is really interesting. But part of me also feels like this song could have been even better if it leaned all the way into that like upbeat R&B pop vibe. Like imagine this song with like an Ariana Grande instrumental in the background. You know what, let me actually try that out and see what it sounds like. But either way, it's a fun song. For me, Call It The End is the one main filler track in this album. It's not bad necessarily, but it feels like it just helps fill in the story without really offering anything new. I think the vibe of this song is already done better on Stay a Little Longer and 2 Years. And while I can understand having this song to really flesh out the story of these on and off relationships and Rosé struggles to move on before the album resolves, it just doesn't really stick out to me that much. Too Bad For Us is next, and it's fairly similar to Call It The End, but for me this song works a lot better. It definitely has more of a resolving tone to it, being more definitive, like, you know, too bad this didn't work out. The bridge is very Taylor Swift, and I guess I'm biased because I do really like it. I also love how the tension builds during the verses, and then the chorus kind of is almost less intense, more stable, because the verses lay out the troubles in this relationship, but then the chorus comes back to this resolution of like, well, that's too bad for us. And I think the lyricism on this song is particularly strong. Definitely one of the best written songs on this album. Finally, Rosie closes out on Dance All Night, which I think is a pretty standard, nice, wholesome way to end the album. As the whole album really dives into various past relationships, exploring toxicity, longing, all these different feelings as these relationships sway up and down as Rosé tries to move on. This song resolves on just putting all those feelings away, even for just one night, to forget about the heartbreak, take a break from all that emotional stress, and dance. And I like that. I really also like the kind of whiny vocal tone she uses here, again in the hook, very reminiscent of 3 AM. Overall, I have definitely had a lot of fun with this album, and we'll probably come back to it every now and then, especially those standout tracks that I pointed out. You may have noticed though, like I mentioned, the standouts on this album for me were largely the more upbeat punk R&B tracks. And that's not to mean anything negative about the more ballady tracks. Those are still great in their own regard. You know I love a good ballad. By the end, it's very clear this is an album about the story. It's focused on Rosé's own emotional processing, her own catharsis, and trying to sort through all these relationships, sort through her emotions, and figure out how to move on. So it makes sense that a lot of the songs are slower, are more kind of mellow, and really just focused on the emotions. I totally get that. But honestly, I do think Rosé just does better with punk and even R&B. Her voice is just naturally really high energy, and I think it complements those instrumentals really well. It's very cathartic, whereas I think some of the ballads kind of blended together by the end. Regardless though, this is a great album, and I think a very solid debut for Rosé's solo career. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10, similar to what I scored The Secret of Us a while back, which like I said, brings a similar vibe overall. Here's my current ranking of the songs. This is definitely subject to change, but this is where I'm at right now. Let me know what you thought of this project, how you feel about Rosé's solo debut, and what you're excited for next. I'm certainly very excited about Lisa's solo album coming out soon. I also believe Blackpink is doing a comeback as the 4 of them together sometime in 2025, so that's gonna be great. Obviously, that's gonna break every record in existence. And I'm of course excited to see what Rosé herself does next. Maybe a tour for this album? Happy New Year. I guess that happened. 2024 is officially done, canceled. Honestly, thank God, though I doubt 2025 will be much better. But that's going to be all for this one. Stay tuned for more analyses and rants and etc. coming soon. Okay, bye!